Welcome to the Explainer. So let's just dive right into it. If you're used to traditional pharma, you're probably used to mixing chemicals and pressing pills, right? But in the world of cell and gene therapies, or CGT, we're doing something entirely different. We are manufacturing living medicines. Because we're dealing with living cells and viral vectors, we can't exactly just run them through a sterilization filter at the very end of the line. It doesn't work that way. Instead, we need a highly specialized, layered blueprint to ensure safe and effective production. Today, we're focusing strictly on the manufacturing process and the control strategy. These are the absolutely vital layers that keep these incredibly complex therapies safe for the patients who need them.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to hit processing basics, autologous versus allogeneic, protecting the process, defining our CQAs and CPPs, and then building the actual control strategy. We're keeping our focus strictly on this manufacturing module today.
All right, Section 1, Processing Basics. Let's see how this all builds from the ground up, looking at the actual unit operations.
So let's lay out the biological timeline for cell processing. Honestly, think of this less like a chemistry experiment and more like raising and training a microscopic army. First up, we've got cell selection and enrichment. This is where we isolate the exact target cell population from the starting material. Next is activation, basically preparing those cells for the journey ahead. Then comes modification. This is where the magic really happens, like introducing an intended genetic change through viral transduction or gene editing. After that, we hit expansion and harvest, which is just growing the cells to the required clinical dose and collecting them. And finally, formulation and cryopreservation, getting the product ready for storage. And hey, remember, freezing and thawing, those are highly critical steps. We absolutely have to understand how they impact cell viability and function.
But wait, what about the vectors that often deliver those genetic modifications in the first place? Well, vector production is this highly orchestrated downstream sequence. It kicks off strategically with transfection or infection, introducing genetic material into producer cells. From there, we move to harvest and clarification to actually recover the vector, followed by some really rigorous purification and concentration. Finally, just like we did with the cells, we end up with formulation and fill finish to prep the purified vector for its final presentation.
Moving right along to Section 2, autologous versus allogeneic, the production paradigm completely shifts depending on who the therapy is actually for.
So the real game changer here is the contrast in scale and scheduling. For autologous manufacturing, it's completely patient-specific. We're talking strict vein-to-vein scheduling with potentially highly variable patient-driven demand. And this is where the human stakes literally come into play. A delay here, that can directly mean a waiting patient misses their treatment window. It is an intensely personal manufacturing chain. Now flip that to allogeneic manufacturing. This is designed for many patients. Here, your big decision is whether to scale up into larger single batches or scale out by running parallel batches or lines. The major challenge? Proving comparability and consistency across all those larger scales or parallel sites. It's just a completely different logistical and regulatory puzzle.
Which brings us to Section 3, and honestly, one of the most crucial parts of handling living medicines, protecting the process.
Here is the million-dollar question, right? We have the amazing tech to modify these fragile cells, but how on earth do we protect them from the outside world during such a complex process? Because, like we said earlier, we cannot conventionally sterilize a living product at the end of the line. So, strict aseptic processing principles have to apply throughout the entire manufacturing journey.
Our primary physical defenses rely really heavily on closed systems. Think of this kind of like building a ship in a bottle. We want to physically prevent any open exposure of the product to the environment. Now, when true closed systems just aren't possible, we use functionally closed systems. These achieve equivalent protection through validated connection and disconnection methods. Then we implement unidirectional flows for both personnel and materials. This drastically reduces the risk of mix-ups or contamination. And a massive pro tip here, your facility flow design needs to be assessed for risk before construction, definitely not retrofitted later. We also use campaign segregation to make absolutely sure we prevent cross-contamination between different patients or platforms.
But here's the thing, physical barriers just aren't enough on their own. Closed systems reduce risk. They do not eliminate the need for total vigilance. We need ongoing environmental monitoring to actually prove our facility controls are working. All of this has to be bundled up into a contamination control strategy, or CCS. This CCS integrates your facility flows, your aseptic practices, and crucially, biosafety and GMO handling controls. Because viral vectors and gene-modified cells trigger some very specific containment obligations. You add in rigorous campaign changeover clearances, and you've created this comprehensive safety net.
To really ground these kind of abstract concepts, let's look at a real-world scenario with Asteria Advanced Therapeutics. Imagine Asteria is operating in an academic site facility.
They're trying to manufacture an autologous T-cell product while simultaneously supporting early AAV process development in that exact same facility. The risk here is off the charts. Sharing equipment and space between a patient-specific cell product and a viral vector process? No way. This scenario brilliantly highlights exactly why you need incredibly strict segregation, rigorous campaign changeovers, and flawless flow controls to prevent cross-contamination way before you ever think about commercial-scale expansion.
All right, Section 4, defining CQAs and CPPs. We've protected the facility, now let's measure the quality inside it.
Let's de-jargonize some of this regulatory alphabet soup, shall we? 3 foundational terms you need to know. First, CQA, or Critical Quality Attribute. Just think of this as the final product property that absolutely must be within a specific range for the therapy to be safe and effective. Second, CMA, Critical Material Attribute. These are the properties of your input materials that you've got to control. And third, CPP, Critical Process Parameter. A CPP is a parameter in your actual manufacturing process, like temperature or hold time, where if it varies, it directly affects a CQA. Simply put, if a process parameter impacts your final quality, it's critical, and you have to monitor and control it.
Let's jump back to our Asteria case study to see how this plays out in practice. If Asteria defines a final CQA for their T-cell product, let's say cell viability, identity, or some specific marker expression, they can't just test for it at the end and cross their fingers hoping for the best. Nope. They have to map that final CQA backwards to the specific upstream processes, those are the CPPs, and the materials, the CMAs, that influence it. They have to ask, which unit operations actually affect cell viability the most? By mapping this all out, manufacturers can pinpoint exactly where they need to place their control points.
And how do we actually track all those parameters? Well, that relies heavily on in-process controls, or IPCs. IPCs give us real-time, or at least near real-time information while we are manufacturing. This lets us make better, faster decisions and give us an early warning if the process starts to drift. Ultimately, all of this feeds into the whole concept of quality by design, or QBD. QBD means we aren't just testing for quality at the end, we are actively building quality directly into the product because we deeply understand our process. When you do it right, you establish what's called a multidimensional design space. It's basically a justified combination of inputs and parameters that guarantees a high-quality product every single time.
Finally, Section 5, building the control strategy. Let's bring it all together. So we synthesize our unit operations, facility flows, and quality attributes into one overarching control strategy. This acts as a fully integrated layered defense system. It starts with material controls, verifying exactly what goes into the process. Then process controls, which includes your IPCs and closed processing systems. Next up, analytical controls for testing and characterization, followed closely by strict release controls to check against all your specifications. But here is absolutely the most crucial takeaway. This strategy doesn't end when the batch is released. It includes shipping and administration controls to maintain the integrity of that product right up until it's delivered at the patient's bedside. All these layers work together. If there's a weakness in one layer, it has to be compensated by a strength in another.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought today. As we've seen throughout this explainer, CGT manufacturing is a highly dynamic, living process. Because of that, your overarching control strategy, especially your contamination control strategy, cannot just be some static compliance checklist sitting in a drawer collecting dust. It has to be a living, breathing, risk-based document. So ask yourself, as your therapy scales from early clinical sites to massive global commercial facilities, is your control strategy dynamic enough to evolve and keep pace? It is a critical question for absolutely anyone in this field to consider. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in cell and gene therapy.